To the world, they were just co-stars. But behind the scenes of The Sound of Music, Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer shared something far deeper. A quiet, unshakable bond that lasted more than 6 decades. He teased her. She steadied him. And through all the years, through every triumph and tragedy, they never stopped leaning on each other. But in his final days, something shifted. Julie couldn't bring herself to say goodbye in person. And when the news came, she was alone. Now she's finally opened up. And what she's just shared about their final moments, it still hurts. Julie Andrews was 28. Christopher Plummer was 34. And neither one of them wanted to be there. The Sound of Music may be a beloved classic now, but in 1964, both stars had their doubts. Julie was still basking in the glow of Mary Poppins. Bright, polished, and eternally optimistic. Christopher was the opposite. A classically trained actor, he had built his career on Shakespeare, tragedy, and war dramas. To him, The Sound of Music felt sugary, sentimental beneath his talent. He made that clear, too. He once admitted he called the film The Sound of Mucus. He would roll his eyes at the script, poke fun at the lyrics, and disappear between takes to smoke and brood. And yet, there was something about Julie that disarmed him. She didn't take herself too seriously. She wasn't fragile. And when he tested her with his sarcasm, she volleyed back with sharp wit and charm. He was a rogue, Julie would later recall, but never cruel. Their friendship wasn't instant. It was earned. In Salzburg, during long shooting days, they learned each other's rhythms. They'd sit quietly between takes, sipping tea, trading stories about their childhoods, their careers, their disappointments. Julie was still healing from the loss of her father. Christopher, from the chaos of a divorce. And somewhere in those Austrian hills, amid costume changes and freezing shoots on mountaintops, a bond formed that neither of them expected. It wasn't romantic, but it was intimate. They knew each other in a way few ever did. Still, when the cameras stopped rolling, Hollywood pulled them in different directions. Julie went on to more musicals. Christopher dove into dramatic roles, determined to shed the image of Captain Von Trapp. For years, they didn't appear on screen together again. But the friendship never faded. They wrote, called, Made Time. And when they did reunite decades later, it was as if no time had passed. Their banter, their trust, it was all still there. Julie once said, "He was my friend. He made me laugh. He was the most fun of all." But what most people don't know is that there was a moment, right at the start of filming, when it almost fell apart. Christopher had been drinking heavily in those days. The pressure of fame, the weight of the role, it all came to a head during one cold day of shooting. He stormed off set, frustrated and angry, slamming a trailer door behind him, and Julie followed him. No one knows exactly what she said in that moment, but when Christopher emerged, his shoulders were softer. His voice was calm, and he never walked off again. From that moment on, she became his anchor. But as the years passed and life grew heavier, it would be Julie, now older, quieter, more guarded, who needed him just as much. The last time Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer stood side by side in public, it was at a celebration honoring The Sound of Music. Fans watched with adoration. They held hands. They smiled for the cameras. The world saw Captain Von Trapp and Maria again, frozen in time. But those who looked closer saw something else. Christopher's frame had grown thin. His voice, once commanding and full, was now soft and slow. Julie never let go of his arm. She spoke carefully that night, gently, as if she didn't want to weigh him down with too many words. And at one point, when asked about their friendship, she paused longer than expected. "I adore him," she said softly. "I always have." But that wasn't the whole story. Julie had already noticed the shift. Christopher had started forgetting small things. Not lines, he never forgot those, but names, places, what city they were in. He was still sharp, still charming, but she could feel it. Something was slipping. She never said it publicly, never acknowledged it in interviews. But close friends of both would later say that Julie sensed the end was near and didn't know how to prepare for it. Because how do you say goodbye to someone who's woven into the very foundation of your life? They had shared decades of memories. He had supported her through her vocal surgery, when she feared she'd never sing again. She had been there when he lost a close friend, when he struggled with loneliness in the years after his third marriage settled into quiet distance. They knew things about each other that no one else did. And not once, in 60 years, had they betrayed each other's trust. In that final public appearance, as the audience applauded, Julie placed her hand over her heart. Not in performance, in farewell. The moment passed quickly, but backstage, she lingered with him longer than usual. No cameras, no script, just silence between two people who had nothing left to prove. It would be the last time they'd be photographed together. Months later, as Christopher's health declined, Julie kept her distance, not out of apathy, but out of reverence. He was a private man. He didn't want visitors, and she honored that. But that doesn't mean she didn't ache. She called, she wrote, she waited, and then one winter morning the phone rang. Julie was alone in her kitchen. The voice on the other end was gentle but final. Christopher Plummer had passed away, quietly, with his wife Elaine by his side. Julie didn't cry immediately. She sat down, took a breath, and whispered something no one heard. Later, when she did speak to the press, her words were elegant, composed, but beneath them, the weight was unmistakable. "The world has lost a consummate actor," she said, "but I have lost a cherished friend." She didn't attend the private funeral, not because she didn't care, but because she couldn't bear to say goodbye in public. Instead, she stayed home, played a piece of music they once loved, and let the grief come, quietly, like snow falling on Salzburg. Julie Andrews thought she knew everything there was to know about Christopher Plummer. They had shared decades of friendship, laughter, and quiet grief. There were no secrets between them, or so she believed. But after his passing, something surfaced, something that left her stunned. It was a letter, not meant for publication, not meant for the public. Just a personal note Christopher had written years earlier, tucked away among old scripts and journals. He never sent it. It was addressed simply to Julie. The handwriting was unmistakable, neat, precise, with just a hint of flourish, so very Christopher. And in it, he captured what he rarely said out loud. He thanked her for her patience, for her humor, for never letting his ego get the better of their friendship. He called her "my North Star," and wrote that if he ever left this world first, he hoped she would remember him not as a performer, but as the man who always looked for her in the crowd. Julie never said much about the letter publicly. She kept it close, quiet, but a close family friend later revealed that the letter changed something in her. It softened her grief, because she finally understood that he had known, all along, how much he meant to her. Christopher had always been guarded, a little distant, even with those he loved. And though they had exchanged plenty of kind words over the years, there had always been a quiet formality between them, like two musicians playing in perfect harmony, but never quite saying what the music meant. This letter, it was the final verse, and it said everything he hadn't. Julie reread it often in the months after his passing, sometimes aloud, sometimes in silence. One line in particular stayed with her. "We were never just colleagues. We were companions in the truest sense, through every storm and every standing ovation." For someone who had spent a lifetime surrounded by applause, those words meant more than any award, because Julie knew exactly what he meant. They had lifted each other when no one else could. In an industry that often isolates, they had stayed connected, grounded, real. And though they never spoke of legacy or how they wanted to be remembered, this one gesture, this unsent letter, became Christopher's legacy to her. A final gift, not for the world, for Julie alone. She never shared the full contents, and she never needed to, because the way she carried herself after his death, the quiet grace, the absence of spectacle, the respect she maintained even in grief, said everything. And fans noticed. In interviews, she was more reflective, more measured. She still smiled, still lit up when the Sound of Music was mentioned. But there was a new depth in her eyes, a distance, as if one part of her had gently closed a door and wasn't ready to open it again. For decades, fans speculated about Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer. They saw the way he looked at her during interviews, the way she rested her hand on his knee when they laughed, the glances, the timing, the unmistakable warmth. Surely, they thought, it had to be more than friendship. But Julie never fed those rumors. She never denied them outright, but she didn't indulge them either, because to explain it would be to reduce it. Their connection was too nuanced for headlines, too sacred for gossip. Christopher once admitted that he had been smitten with Julie in the early days, that her voice, her poise, her intelligence, it all captivated him. But he also knew that to pursue her romantically would have changed everything. Julie was married to designer Tony Walton during The Sound of Music, and later to director Blake Edwards. Christopher went on to have his own long-term relationships and eventually remarried. Their lives moved on, but never away from each other. They didn't need to be lovers. They were something else entirely. Julie once described it this way to a close friend. He knew me without needing anything from me. There's a kind of intimacy that comes from being seen, not through desire, but through recognition. They watched each other age. They held each other through the loss of loved ones, through career disappointments, through quiet victories that only they would ever understand. And through it all, they kept laughing. Even in their final years, when they were rarely seen together in public, they would send each other cards. Ridiculous, playful, sometimes hand-drawn. Julie kept every single one. She once showed one to a friend. It had a sketch of Captain Von Trapp and Maria, drawn clumsily in colored pencil. On the back, Christopher had written, "Still can't sing, but you make me want to try." It was that balance of mischief and tenderness that defined them. Julie never needed flowers or grand gestures from him. His loyalty, his presence, his ability to make her laugh when everything else felt heavy, that was more meaningful than romance. And perhaps that's why losing him hurt so deeply, because it wasn't just a friend she lost. It was the one person who had been there, quietly and constantly, through every phase of her life. Someone who understood the pressure of fame without explanation. Someone who saw her not as Julie Andrews, the legend, but as Julie, the woman who sometimes needed to be held in silence. They shared something rare in Hollywood: consistency. Not every friendship endures through decades of change, but theirs did. And now, without him, the world felt a little quieter. Julie continued to work. She appeared at charity events. She wrote, but those who knew her well noticed the difference. She didn't mention him often, but when she did, it was always with the same word: cherished. A word that doesn't scream. It whispers, says he mattered, still does. Julie Andrews has always carried herself with poise. Even in sorrow, there's a stillness about her, a kind of grace that makes her grief feel almost sacred. But after Christopher Plummer's death, something shifted. She didn't give teary interviews. She didn't appear on tribute specials. She didn't release a lengthy statement. Instead, she stepped back. She let the world mourn him as Captain Von Trapp. But privately, she mourned the man no one else truly knew. Her public tribute was brief, simple, just one sentence that echoed everywhere: "I have lost a cherished friend." But in private moments, captured only in passing by those closest to her, Julie was different. She started revisiting old memories, not on camera, but in quiet corners of her home. She reread old letters. She went through boxes of photos from Salzburg. She watched clips, not of the finished film, but of the raw footage. The takes where Christopher flubbed a line and laughed, where she teased him with a raised eyebrow, where they locked eyes with that unspoken knowing. There were no tears in those memories, just presence. And that, in many ways, was harder. Because for Julie, grief wasn't loud. It was steady. She stopped attending major events for a while. She declined projects. She stayed home. Friends noticed her smile took just a moment longer to appear. That her stories about The Sound of Music, once told with sparkle, now carried a pause. Like she was waiting for him to chime in with a joke that would never come. She wasn't depressed. She was adjusting to a world without his voice. She once told a friend during that year, "I'm still waiting for the phone to ring and hear him say, 'What nonsense are you up to now?'" But it never rang, and so she began to honor him in quieter ways. She started donating to programs for young stage actors, something Christopher cared deeply about. She wrote a foreword for a re-release of his memoir, carefully preserving the words he had chosen without altering a thing. And in one rare moment, during a talk about legacy, Julie was asked what she hoped people would remember about Christopher Plummer. She didn't mention the awards, or the roles, or even the sound of music. She paused, smiled gently, and said that he was kind, that he never needed the spotlight to shine. Those who knew her best say that moment was the closest she came to breaking. Because it was true. Christopher never chased applause. He never asked for adoration. And yet, he gave his all to every scene, to every friendship, to her. Julie Andrews lost more than a co-star. She lost her balance, her steady presence, her partner in mischief. And though she continued on, because that's who she is, something inside her quietly closed when he left. She never said goodbye publicly, but maybe she didn't need to, because their goodbye happened in the spaces between words, in that final letter, in that last glance, in the echo of a song they once sang, not as characters but as companions. Julie Andrews has lived a life filled with spotlight, accolades, ovations, iconic roles. She's endured more change, more loss, and more legacy than most of us could imagine. But when it came to Christopher Plummer, none of that mattered. He wasn't just another chapter in her career. He was the through line, the friend who made her laugh when the world felt heavy, the man who stood beside her on stage and off, never asking for anything more than honesty. And when he left, the silence was personal. Julie never needed to say everything, because sometimes the deepest grief is the one you protect the most. Their story didn't end with a grand farewell. It ended the way their friendship always lived. Quietly, with dignity, with love. And maybe that's the most enduring legacy of all. For more emotional stories, check out this video.